Okay, so today's lesson is on square roots with variables. So square roots with variables are also known as monomial square roots. Just like numbers, variables can be simplified. So there's just two rules that we need to talk about before we get into it. So if m is a multiple of 2, so if this number right here is a multiple of 2, or if it's, we can think about it if it's even, use the rule, the square root of a to the m power is a to the m over 2. So for example, let's say that this is a 6. So if we had something that looked like this, a to the 6th, then all we have to do in order to solve this is divide this 6, this number, by 2. So it's going to be a to the 3rd power. That's how you'd simplify, that's how you'd solve the square root of a to the 6th. You just divide that number by 2 and that would be your answer. So if it's not a multiple of 2, so if this was like a 7 or a 9 or some other number, we're going to break it apart. So if this is an odd number, you can think about it that way. Break it apart. So you're going to have a, so for example, if we had, because this is probably a little bit confusing, if we had something like a to the 7th, so this is not a multiple of 2, we're going to say square root of a to the 6th times a. So a to the 7th, notice that this is this number right here. And then if we subtract 7 minus 1, that's 6. So now this is even. So now we can simplify a to the 6th, and we'll just leave the a inside. So a to the 6th is going to be a to the 3rd power, square root of a. And we'll go over this in more detail, but this is just kind of a preview of what we're doing here. So square root of a to the 6th, you divide that number by 2, it's 3. When it's an odd number, you're going to subtract 1, and then you take the square root of a to the 6th, which we just found out was a to the 3, and you leave that a inside the square root, so square root of a. Okay, so if we have, number 1, if we're looking at square root of x squared, the 2 is even, so we're just going to divide that number by 2, and 2 divided by 2 is 1, which is just the same thing as just having x by itself. Okay, that 6 is even, so we're going to divide that by 2. So m to the 6th divided by 2, which is m to the 3rd power, and that's your answer. So like I said, we're just dividing that number inside by 2. So if we have a number and a variable, we have to think of them separately. So this is like saying the square root of 9 times the square root of k squared. Well, the square root of 9 is 3. If you put that in your calculator, it comes out evenly. And the square root of k squared, we always divide this number by 2 if it's even. So 2 divided by 2 is 1. So our answer is 3, because square root of 9 is 3. Square root of k squared is k, so 3k is our answer. Number 4, it's the same thing as saying square root of 64 times the square root of p to the 4th. So square root of 64 here is 8. And p to the 4th, again, we just divide that number by 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2. So our answer is 8p squared. So square root of 100 times square root of x squared times square root of y squared. So see, we're just breaking all these apart. And you don't have to break them apart. You can think of it all as separate. But I'm just showing you that we do think of these as separate terms. So like the square root of 100 is 10. The square root of x squared, we divide this number by 2. So it's x and y. Okay, square root of 49 times the square root of a squared, b6, c4. So the square root of 49 is 7. The square root of a squared, again, we divide that number by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 6 divided by 2 is 3. And then 4 divided by 2 is 2. So that's our answer. Okay, so I want you guys to try 5 and 6. Now look at number 7. Number 7, notice that this is odd. So now this is not a multiple of 2. So when it's not a multiple of 2, we have to, it's an odd number or not a multiple of 2, so we have to subtract 1. Okay, so we're going to say 5 minus 1. And then we're going to times it by y. Okay, so 5 minus 1 is 4. Now, we still have 5 y's underneath, don't we? Y to the 5th. This is, remember when we multiply variables, we add their exponents. There's still like there's still a 1 here. So if we were to add those together, we would still get y to the 5th. So we're not changing anything. We're just subtracting 1 when it's an odd exponent so that we could solve it easily. So this is like the square root of y to the 4th times the square root of y. Well, if we divide this by 2, that's 2. So we have y squared on the outside, and we still have a square root of y left because it was an odd number. So we have a y on the inside of the square root, and that's your answer. Okay, so let's look at these separately again. So the square root of a squared, we know that that's going to be a, right? Because we just divide that number by 2. But this is not a multiple of 2. So we have to subtract 1. So 3 minus 1, and we're going to multiply that by b. So b squared times b. So 3 minus 1 is 2. And then we still have a b left over. We're going to simplify that piece. So 2 divided by 2 is 1. And we have 1b left on the outside, and we have a square root of b left on the inside. So square root of b to the 3rd, we could simplify like this. And then the square root of a squared is just a. And that's your answer, ab square root of b. Because we have a times b right here, which is ab, and then square root of b is just on the outside. Okay, so we can break up number 9, x squared, square root of y cubed, square root of z, square root of z to the 4th. So we're going to look at our odd numbers, the numbers that are not multiples of 2, and we're going to do this. We're going to subtract 1. Oh, okay, square root of x squared is x. Square root of y to the 3rd, we subtract 1, so 3 minus 1 is 2. So the square root of y squared is y, and then we just keep this on the inside, so I'm going to replace that there. And then z to the 4th is just z squared, because I can just divide that by 2. Now, see how all of these are on the outside of the square root? I'm going to put them all together, so x times y times z squared. And then the only thing that's left inside the square root is the square root of y, so I'm going to just tack that on the last half of it. So I always put this, just the proper way to write it, you always put the square root at the very end. So try 10 and 11, and I'm going to do 12 with you. So again, I just broke it up into pieces. The square root of 196 is 14. And the square root of d squared, that's an even number, so that's just d. Now this has that odd number, it's not a multiple of 2. So 5 minus 1 is 4. And then I'm going to multiply it by c. So the square root of c to the 4th, oh wait, nope, I did that part. Okay, so square root of c to the 4th is c squared, and then times the square root of c, so that's going to be your answer here. So it's squared, c squares on the outside, and then times c times d. So your answer is, now again, you're going to take everything that's on the outside, and this should be c squared. You're going to take everything that's on the outside, so 14 c squared and d, and you're going to put it here, 14 c squared and d, and the square root of c is the only thing that's left on the inside of the square root, so we're just going to leave it there. We're going to put it on the very end, and then that's your answer. Okay, number 13. So now these problems, they're not going to simplify. So square root of 8 is not a perfect square root. That's what I mean. So now we need to think back on our last notes. The square root of 8, remember we always divide by one of our perfect squares. So remember our perfect squares are like 1, 4, 9, 16, 25. So we're going to divide this number on the inside by our first perfect square, or second perfect square, which is 4. And we got 2 there. So we can say, okay, well the square root of 4 times the square root of 2 is square root of 8. What's the square root of 4? 2. So we have 2 square root 2. So that 8 is the same thing when you simplify it, is 2 square root 2. And x to the 6, if you divide this by 2, is 3. So now I'm going to combine the two pieces on the outside, which is 2 and x cubed, and then square root of 2 is going to be on the very end. So 14, square root of 50 times a square root of x squared. So remember, we divide that 50 by our perfect squares. So 50 divided by 4 is 12.5. We can't have a decimal, so I'm going to cross that off. 50 divided by 9, that's a decimal as well. 16 is a decimal. But 50 divided by 25 is 2. That means the square root of 25 times the square root of 2 is going to be our answer. And we know the square root of 25 comes out 5. So 5 square root of 2, that's what 50 is simplified to. And then square root of x squared is just going to be x. We divide this by 2. I'm going to take my two numbers on the outside and I'm going to multiply them together, and then I'm going to put the square root of 2 at the end. Okay, so square root of 68, remember, divide this by our perfect squares. So I noticed that the 68 divided by 4 is 17, but I'm going to check a couple more just to make sure there's no higher numbers, because remember, you always want to take the greatest number. So none of these work, so that means that my original 68 divided by 4 is 17. This is what I'm going to use. I just checked just to make sure that there was no greater perfect squares that would work for this case. So that just means the square root of 4 times the square root of 17. Square root of 4 is 2, and I'm going to keep that square root of 17 by itself on the inside of the square root. So I'm going to replace the 68 with this, and then p to the third is the same thing as p square root of p, because remember, we subtract 1, so 3 minus 1 is 2. The square root of p squared is p, and then we just keep that p on the inside. So now we're going to look at everything that's on the outside. So we have 2 and p on the outside, and we have square root of 17 times the square root of p on the inside. So I'm just going to put them together under the same square root. Okay, try 16 and 17. We'll do 18. So the square root of 180 times we're going to break this up. Okay, let's do this first. So I already figured this out I already put this in my calculator, so I divided this by 4, 9, 16, 25, and then 36 was the biggest one I found. So it's square root of 36 times the square root of 5, which is 6 square root of 5. Okay, and then x cubed is odd, so now I know I need to break it up like this, which is just going to be x square root of x. Okay, and then y square root of 8 is just y to the 4th. So now look at all of these pieces, 6x and y to the 4th. These are all on the outside of the square root, so I'm going to put 6x y to the 4th, and then what's left on the inside is 5 and x. So I'm going to put square root of 5x, and that's your answer. Okay, 19. 160 is 16 times 10. Again, I already did this in the calculator, so I figured that out. So it's 4 square root of 10. And then a cubed is a square root of a. So anytime you see anything cubed, this is what it's going to come out as. We've been seeing this a lot. And then b to the 6th, that's an even number, so we can just divide that by 2, so it's b cubed. And now we're going to look at all of our numbers on the outside, so 4a and b cubed, and we're going to put that together. And what's left on the inside of the square root is 10 and a. So you guys try 20, and we're not going to do 23 and 24, so let's try 21, and then you guys will try 22. So 72 can be broken down into square root of 36 times the square root of 2. So that's 6 square root of 2. So that's how you break square root of 72 down. Now I'm going to look at m to the 9th. So this is like m to the 8th times m. And the square root of m to the 8th, you divide that by 2, so it's m to the 4th, and m is on the inside. And then n to the 12th is n to the 6th when you divide that by 2 because it's an even number. P squared, you divide that number by 2, you just have 1 p left. So these are all 4 of the pieces. I have this was square root of 72 simplified, m to the 9th simplified, n to the 12th, and p squared. So I'm going to take every single piece that's on the outside, which is 6, m to the 4th, n to the 6th, p, and I'm going to put all that together, and then I'm going to take what's inside the square root, which is 2 and m, and put that inside the square root, and that's your final answer. So I want you guys to try 22, and then try to write a summary about what you learned in today's lesson.